generally speaking, my recommendation is companies with good loss ratios need to be looking at captives. If you can't manage risk, you probably shouldn't be in a self-insurance world.
Welcome to The Defense Never Rests with Morgan and Akins, your monthly dose of uncommon sense about all things legal and some that are not.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Defense Never Rests. I am your hostess, Megan Henry, and today I have on Matthew Queen. And for those of you who may recall, we had him on a few weeks ago. And a few weeks ago, he talked about getting on panel, which of course is something a lot of defense attorneys want to know the secret sauce to. Today, Matthew's here to talk about something a little different because he's changed roles and now he's the chief risk officer of Goldner Capital Management, and he manages captives. And a lot of us don't even understand captives. So he's kind of here to unpack it a little bit for us and explain how captives work, what industries they're best for. And again, also, as always, he dives into counsel, what he looks for defense counsel. So with that, let's bring him in. Hi, Matthew. Welcome back on the Defense Never Rests. I'm so happy to have you back today. How are you?
Thank you for having me.
So we had you on a few weeks ago and we recorded an episode talking about panel counsel or how to get on panel. And today we're shifting gears because your gears have shifted and you've shifted over to a new role. Some of our listeners might not be that familiar with captive. So can you give like the, 101, version of what a captive may be?
Sure. A captive is a wholly owned insurance company, and it is captive to a parent. Now, in my case, it's a private equity group. So the captive provides insurance for a variety of different subsidiaries across the country. But the captive concept got started in the 50s or the 60s when there were no reinsurers that were willing to do business. I think it was with coal miners. So there's some sort of a coverage crisis. And some guy basically has had this idea, what's insurance? It's a pool of cash. We'll make our own insurance company. And it went on from there. And the Internal Revenue Service never really liked it because of the balance sheet problem. Their idea was that, okay, so you created this magic bank account that where the money goes in is suddenly a tax deduction. That doesn't make any sense. It's in the same economic family. And really, this was actually a huge point of debate. And it's really important to remember that under Internal Revenue Code Section 162, business insurance, most insurance and overall, is a tax deduction. So how easy is it to manufacture kind of a phony baloney tax deduction? And think about it. Right. So I'm going to insure this cell phone right here for $1 million. Yesterday I had that money in my savings account. Tomorrow I put it into my captive insurance company, but because I'm calling it premium, all of a sudden it's a tax deduction. So the Internal Revenue Service saw potential for abuse right from the beginning. And then in 1989, with the Humana case, the Internal Revenue Service's arguments on the economic family doctrine were firmly put to rest. And I would argue that since 1989, the world of captive insurance has been legitimized and has grown relatively well in fits and starts over the years. It grows like a vine or like kudzu in periods of a hard market, like we're in right now. And then it doesn't do so well in a soft market. And the reason for that is that most people are just going after cheap insurance. And I'm sure you can feel the pain. If there are any defense attorneys listening to this, literally no one cares how good you are. Everyone's just going after the cheapest defense attorney. So differentiating yourselves as an insurance company is almost as hard as trying to say that you're better than another lawyer down the street.
Yeah. And is that why, in my experience, a lot of captives, they have a lot of meetings outside the United States? Like, I feel like a lot of them are domiciled in Bermuda or the Cayman Islands or other locations. Was that traditionally why that occurred, because of the issues of the IRS early on?
Not necessarily. It's a good question. So that's no longer the case because of the Trump tax cuts. So it had nothing to do with captives, but it was Apple had just some obscene amount of money that was parked, I want to say, in Ireland. Long story short, they changed the rules to make it more capital efficient to bring money back onshore. And as a consequence, I believe it's the controlled foreign corporation rules changed, and a lot of these offshore captives became less useful. So we saw an inflight of captives from various offshore locales back into the United States. But Bermuda is a reinsurance hub. And when you're setting up a complex insurance company, going to where people know what they're doing makes a lot of sense. So Bermuda and Cayman are big. Vermont is big. Vermont is, I would argue, the capital of captives in the United States, which is kind of, I'm embarrassed to say I've never even set foot in the state of Vermont. You'd think I would have made my way there, but no, still haven't. I'm still never been.
It's beautiful.
Long story short, offshore is also where you find a lot of your Lloyd's connections. So people who either work for Lloyd's or work with Lloyd's, generally speaking, have the institutional knowledge to pull off what you want to pull off. So you end up with a lot of kind of overseas work in this space. So,
what type of industries, are good candidates for captives? Could it be any, or is it there's certain types that it's more niche based that it's good for?
Well, I'll tell anyone who's listening that I think that big ticket cyber insurance is a Ponzi scheme, and it doesn't take a genius to figure out why. The underwriters continue to misunderstand the nature of the risk. And if you look at what's going on in Kazakhstan right now, they're under a revolution. They shut down the internet. That's a 19 million person country. It could never happen here. But that, I'm going to say a bad word, that's bullshit. Okay, get it from your head. It absolutely can happen here. And evidence number one, or evidence A, I'm not a very good lawyer. The point is, look at COVID. COVID could never happen here because their CDC is too good. We're a first world country, blah, 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 blah. And then, if you have kids, they've been home like 50% of the time for 2 years. So like nobody expected COVID to be able to happen here. And because of these non-state actors that are being leveraged by the great powers in lieu of kinetic action, you're going to start to see mass scale cyber events become the norm, which means that when you go to your cyber policies, you see that big exclusion on there for war exclusions, it doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. And this is not academic. When I think Russia shut down like an airliner over Malaysia or something a couple of years ago, and all the political risk insurers sat there and said, oh, it's not covered. It's not covered because Russia said they didn't do it. I mean, that was it. That was the end of the discussion. So then the traditional airline coverage had to come into effect. All right. So now everyone's sitting there thinking Matthew's a chicken little. He doesn't know what he's talking about. If China or the DPRK shut down the internet in New York, obviously cyber insurance wouldn't come into effect because that's an act of war. But if it's through the Foot Clan or some Al Qaeda clone that just happens to be the internet address comes out of Singapore or something, DPRK is not going to take responsibility for it. China's not going to take responsibility for it. It's this autonomous terrorist organization that could very well actually be in Beijing. So then the cyber insurance carriers are on the hook. But now think about what I just told you. If network interruption is a part of your basic cyber policy and 15 or 20% of your insureds declare a business interruption claim at the same time,
right?
And that's occurring at AIG and Beasley and CNA and Liberty. And I mean, holy smokes, the reinsurers will run out of liquidity. This is not an insurable interest. And I'm so confident in this because just look at the fraud triangle. You get the means, the motive, and the opportunity. Does a state actor have the means, like the resources, to be able to pull something off, like shutting down Bank of America for a day, shutting down ADP for a couple of weeks, shutting down the internet? Yeah, I think they do. And right. Do they have the intel somewhere in Russia or China? Yeah, of course, that. So do they have the opportunity? Probably. I'm not a computer science guy, but I think they probably have spies in place. It doesn't take a tremendous amount of creative thinking to see how the opportunity may be there. So is the motive there? Currently, no. But that could change. China could make a move on Taiwan. Russia could invade Ukraine. We could have a nut job in the White House. I mean, just, things can change. So I don't think that people are thinking about this clearly. And history shows that insurance carriers have never understood cyber. It started off as a throwaway on a property policy that they just threw in there. And then it became its own policy once the losses showed up. And they said, oh, goodness, cyber is actually a real thing. Now the ransomware wave has really hit and they're pulling up deductibles. Ransomware is now an endorsement, not necessarily part of the package deal. They're always a step behind.
Yeah.
Now I'm talking about a black swan event. But then the insurance carriers will say that this is like any other black swan event, like 4 hurricanes and an earthquake hitting the same time at Miami is like a 1 in a trillion event, which is true, except I'm not talking about 4 hurricanes and an earthquake. I'm talking about not even rogue. I'm talking about state-sponsored guerrilla warfare as another means of political persuasion in a world where nobody really wants to see the nukes go off, but you kind of sort of do have differences of opinion between the great powers. So I'm saying that's not a 1 in a trillion event. I'm saying it's likely, and I would bet 1 Bitcoin, you're going to see something like what I'm talking about before the end of our careers.
Yeah. So, but backpedaling a little bit though, I in my experience with captives, like there's certain industries that tend to gravitate towards joining together as a group to have a captive insurance group. And are there any industries that you, in your experience, you feel are better equipped to fall under that umbrella?
Sure. Well, let's continue on with the doom and gloom idea. If you have a cyber exposure of 7 or 8 figures, you should be self-insuring it because the market's not going to be there for you.
Correct. Yeah.
If you're in an otherwise battered and bruised industry, skilled nursing facilities, commercial trucking, what are some of the other areas you just see get sued all the time? I mean, do you have any examples?
Well, I mean, I found a lot of times I've seen captives in like even like beauty salons. For some weird reason, I've had experience with a lot of them joining together.
That's extraordinary. I've never seen that.
That's odd to me, but yeah, I've seen that before.
So I wonder what their exposure would be there. So let's run through this in our heads. So the big ones I was listing are like highly regulated industries where you need to have A-rated paper, but the paper is so expensive, it's cheaper to self-insure. Commercial trucking being probably at the very top of the list, followed closely by my bread and butter, skilled nursing. But if you're in a beauty salon,
right?
I wonder if their coverage, I'm not sure if it would be, I guess it'd be under the general liability cover. Mm-hmm. Like if you injure someone, or that'd be under professional line of some type? It'd be under GL.
Yeah.
And GL, monoline GL is historically pretty unprofitable. Like it's always a package deal, like PLGL or GL and workers' comp. They generally don't sell it alone. So if you were to have a monoline GL policy and you had enough beauty salons, then maybe I could see that working. Well, then you got to figure out what layer you're taking into the captive. Go ahead.
And maybe, and this is just something I'm thinking about, maybe it has a lot to do with your stylists aren't employees. Usually they're independent contractors, typically. So you're the expert on this. So maybe that has something to do with it, that it's not a traditional employee model. It's a contractor model.
I could see that. I could see where the liability rates are so high that they need to have a captive. And if it's in the liability space, they may want to consider a risk retention group so they can ride across state lines in contravention of McCarran-Ferguson.
Yeah. So one thing that comes to mind, though, if you say you have a group of, in your case, you have a group of skilled nursing facilities together. And what if one of those facilities has a catastrophic loss? How does that affect the rest of the group?
Well, it depends. So right now we all sing Kumbaya. So if someone comes in with $1 million policy or a $1 million verdict, we are not going to pay $1 million settlement, that's for sure. But if you come in with $1 million verdict, it's coming out of the kitty, So I got to talk about whether or not we're still properly collateralized after that. But in a larger group, so let's go back over to my good friends, the PEO crowd. Have you ever heard of a PEO?
No, enlighten me.
So these are they have taken so if you think insurance is boring, oh my God, if I got something for you. These guys took all of it. They took insurance, they took benefits, they took all that stuff. The CEO just says, oh my God, kill me. And they put it into one provider. And then these providers go around and just provide benefits and insurance coverage for just a ton of organizations. So I believe they're called a professional employer organization.
Right.
So anyway, the PEO can end up having participants in it that range from an underground mining company to a law firm. So the workers' comp exposure is just materially different. If you're a workers' comp carrier, how do you price the proper risk for a group like that? It's impossible.
Yeah.
So you need to have a lot of money before the underwriters are going to do the manual underwriting on an account like that. And most people, even a big company is only going to have, $100,000, $250,000 in workers' comp premium. So what the PEOs did was they banded together and they created a group captive. And then what they did was they layered the sucker up real well. So they basically fundamentally took a big deductible, $500,000 deductible, and then financed the $500,000 in a captive. But then specifically what they did was the first 100,000 was almost like a self-insured retention, ran through their captives. It was financed by the captive. So they got that tax deduction on the front end for financing it. And then the next 400 excess of the 100 was shared according to what's called an incurred retrospective rating plan. And then a 500 excess of 500, well, really the infinity excess of 500 was with a carrier. Let's just pretend it's Travelers. Doesn't matter who it's with.
Sure.
So in that 400 excess of 100 layer, any losses in there were shared pro rata. So if it was a $100,000 loss, or I guess, just to make round numbers easy, if for some reason we had $100,000 in that layer, a $200,000 loss, first 100 in the SIR, next 100 in that shared layer with 10 people, everybody contributes 10 grand to it. And we all get angry at that guy who had the big loss.
Yes.
But then at the end of the period, policy period, quarter, whatever, the offending party would then owe premium to the other participants of the pool as basically a true up.
Yeah, because that was my follow-up question was, it's almost twofold. One, do the member, say you have an established captive, okay, say you have 20 entities established in this captive, and there's a potential new party to come in. How does bringing in a new party work? And secondly, can you say someone they keep getting these their loss ratios are so high and they're draining out the captive. Can you then push that entity out?
Yeah. So it depends on the type of captive you have. There's risk retention groups, there's group captives, single parent captives. So if we're in some sort of a group, either an RRG or what we call an actual group captive, then you can bring people in. This is much easier to do in RRG land, but let's start with group captives because I think your M&A crowd will understand it. You got A shares and B shares. And if you're in the founders club, you're probably gonna be A shares and they're gonna be hard to kick out. So make sure you choose your business partners wisely. But as you grow, if someone's only bringing, a couple of bucks of premium, but they have good loss ratios, you may want to offer them non-voting B shares. And if their loss ratio exceeds X for a policy period or two, kick them out. Simple as that. But if, somebody with A shares who has every right to be there starts burning it up and you don't have some sort of provision to either buy them out or have them exit gracefully on the front end, they can burn up the whole program, or you could lose your capital part, which would be like Travelers or Liberty, whoever's helping you out with the whole plan. So generally speaking, my recommendation is companies with good loss ratios need to be looking at captives. If you can't manage risk, you probably shouldn't be in a self-insurance world.
Yeah. And for you, how does your vetting process go? Because you're at the brink of this. You're starting this, and so you have entities part of your group, and so how do you go about vetting who's in and who's out?
So the answer for me is easy. They hired me to do a self-insurance program, so I'm not going to non-renew anyone. Everyone's in. We own them all. If I'm looking at somebody coming to me asking for insurance from me, I am allowed to offer insurance. Captive law allows me to do that. And because I'm a captive, it's oftentimes much, much cheaper because we're regulated much more lightly by comparison to our admitted carrier partners. Raising the real question, why doesn't everyone use a captive? Mm-hmm. Well, number one, the admitted carriers have A-rated paper. AM Best rated paper typically doesn't burn up. Some RRGs have, some captives have. So there's a brand problem that we have going against us. And there's also capacity problems. I can only offer so much because there's a solvency ratio. So if I've got $1 million in the bank and they're judging me on let's just say a 5-to-1 premium to surplus ratio, I can only write up to $5 million in gross written premium. So if you come to me with a $50 million opportunity, I'm probably going to refer you out to one of my best friends just because I can't touch that. Yeah. So there's reasons to have different types of carriers. In terms of pricing out the risk, the industry standard is to look at your loss runs, and that's useful. I think that it's better to try to understand the industry, and that's really where we can outpace a lot of our competition. I've looked at how admitted carriers look at things like skilled nursing facilities, and the majority are just monkeys. They do not understand the nature of the risk. They don't know what questions to ask. They all copy each other. They all kind of sort of underwrite in the same way. And it's because literally the same employees move from company to company. It's all a big club. And you end up with a lot of people saying, well, we do it that way because CNA does it. Well, we're doing it that way because AIG does it. AIG and CNA have literally the exact same VPs removed by like 3 or 4 years from each other. So there's not a lot of true innovation in loss picking, at least at the admitted carrier level. The reason that the admitted carriers do so well is because they have $1 billion. So if you've got the ability to ride out the hard market or a soft market and make a little bit less money for some period of time, that's a strategic advantage. It's just as good as having a moat. So in order for me to survive, if I bring on third-party risk, I have to start looking at other areas. And I have to be a little dodgy on this because I can't tell you what my secret sauce is. We are actively working on some interesting underwriting algorithms. But if I were to go to something like, let's just say commercial trucking, where I'm absolutely not doing anything, first thing I would do is I would go directly to the government. Okay, what data you got? And let me just start looking at it. Then you want to start correlating that. Okay, so like, what are the non-intuitive leading indicators of risk? So find out, you got to get some loss runs so you can see what losses look like, and then start reverse engineering. Okay, so how long were they driving? How many, what kind of stuff were they driving? What state were they in? What time of the day was it? And just start trying to find, was it sunny? Was the sun reflecting off of the asphalt and creating like a difficult situation to see? Like you can start to train that out in the data. And when you see those kinds of signals in the noise, that's what you want to price into your underwriting algorithm. Okay. So this is a little more complex than the way carriers do. Carriers will sit there and say, I need to see 5 years of loss runs. I want to look at your managers. Tell me how long you've been running the facility. Can you give me your experience? And then on industry by industry basis, they may ask a few other questions that are germane to the industry. But really developing like a bespoke, like loss rating method, most admitted carriers won't do that. They just don't have the time.
Yeah. So why is skilled nursing why is it such a great fit for that space, for this space?
Most of the operators aren't able to manage the risk very well. The plaintiff's bar does have a good point here. They aren't winning all these cases. They're not getting these big settlements for nothing. When someone comes in and, they die of a pressure ulcer 6 weeks later, come on, man. You kind of did that. So more often than not, there's mitigating factors, but anyone in this spot, anyone listening to this who's litigates skilled nursing, you've seen the black hole nursing homes of death. And there are thousands of them, thousands across the country. Then you've got, market forces. For whatever reason, the plaintiff's bar just has decided they're going after them too. Well, it's not for whatever reason. you've got the government involved mandating 1 mil, 3 mil limits. So when you got the big limits, plus you got a lot of operators who aren't very good, and it's not particularly sympathetic to a jury. I mean, let's face it, it's one step south of a hospital, and those are hard enough to defend. Like it kind of adds up. So you really have to be on your game to run these things well, and then you really have to be on top of claims to be able to defend them.
I mean, I feel as though too, there's just such a big emotion factor involved when, if someone were to get hurt or pass away in a skilled nursing facility, the family has so much emotion that I feel like it's just ripe for lawsuits, because the family likes to look for comfort or reasons why this could have happened to their loved one too. So I just feel that there's just it's like a minefield of risk.
Yeah, don't kill grandma. I mean, that's basically, if I'm a plaintiff's attorney, that's where I'm going to start and end my trial, and that's persuasive. And let's not forget, who are the idiots you have on the other side? I mean, you got more often than not, corporate control of these skilled nursing facilities. They're going to show up in their suits. They're going to sound really smart, and they probably did the best that they could. But it doesn't really take a lot for the plaintiffs to be able to draw out, like, hey, you're chronically understaffed and you're making all this money hand over fist. And then it's really, it's difficult for the defense to be able to draw out, no, look, I'm not making money hand over fist. When I do all these things for them, I'm actually this is actually a loss leader. I'm actually losing money on these therapies. And then the reason that we did this over here was because of this other factor. I mean, it gets technical. And unless you are damn good at putting together a story, you can lose the jury pretty quick.
Yeah. And I even at this present moment, over the last, I think 2 years, I think they've also gotten just a really bad rap. I mean, remember at the beginning of COVID, it was, the COVID was rampant through these facilities. And I think that I think a lot of plaintiffs' attorneys latched onto that as well.
Yeah. So the COVID thing, I'm actually pretty bullish on. If you want to sue me for COVID, bring it on. I mean,
well, I might agree.
Seriously, where's the proximate cause?
Yeah.
Where's the proximate cause? Come on, duty, breach, causation, damages. So like, how are you going to prove by, I guess, the preponderance of the evidence that they necessarily got COVID from one of my employees versus literally anywhere else in the universe? So I'm fine with those cases. I have not seen a single COVID related claim. So we are scared to death of COVID, but it has nothing to do with sleazy plaintiffs' attorneys. It has everything to do with just the human point of, God, if these people, it spreads. In fact, it spreads like super duper fast. So I am currently like struggling to get a couple facilities to sit down with me and talk about some things I think are important with fall risk mitigation. Okay.
Sure.
One of the reasons they keep blowing me off was because they had an outbreak of COVID. And I was like, okay, how many people have it? Like overnight, they do testing all the time.
Yeah.
So overnight, 15 people got it out of nowhere. And we test our employees every day, and we do testing of the residents frequently. I won't say every day because they just can't do it every day, but it's a lot. So all of a sudden, 15.
Yeah.
And you know what it was by the end of the third day? 30.
Yeah, of course. That's how it works.
And like we're quarantining people. We got every employee wears a mask. Like in nice masks too. And even still, you see it just rapidly spread. Now, this is the Omicron version, which is like,
yeah.
I honestly God believe it's more contagious than even the CDC realizes. It's uncontrollable. Good thing nobody's dying, but that was not the case with Alpha. When COVID came through the first time, it killed a lot of people.
Yeah.
And there was nothing we could do to stop it. What we literally had to do was put up it was a physical barrier, it was plastic sheets. We had COVID wings. And the plaintiffs' attorneys are probably jumping up and down saying we're about to make a lot of money, because when we're spending time doing that, we're not monitoring other things. So as a consequence, when COVID rolls through, I see an increase in incidents and slips and falls and claims and injuries. And it's just sucks.
Yeah.
Like very difficult to be able to manage a skilled nursing facility when you got COVID running through there like a Grim Reaper.
Yeah. And, that's such a good point. I'm glad you bring that up, though, because I think that's something a lot of people don't realize. Like when you have to, rightfully so, have to focus attention over here on COVID, it does draw that. And I hesitate in saying it this way, but you have to shift your attention, and you don't want to shift your attention, but you're forced to. You can't be looking in every direction all of the time.
Yeah, we've got staffing shortages across the industry.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And that's another area where the plaintiffs bar, they've been nailing us on the profits over patients arguments, but honestly, that's going to ring a little hollow now. I mean, it's their number one weapon against us. Is profits over patients. You make all this money, which is not exactly true. The margins are thin to upside down, but on a cash flow basis, there's no question about it. Healthcare has a lot of money going through the system.
Sure.
So obviously, we're just a bunch of evil capitalists. but the problem with that argument is that Medicaid reimbursement, and Medicaid is a significant chunk of the money that comes for skilled nursing. Medicaid sucks. Like, it's bad. And not only is it bad, it's also behind. Now, I got to be honest, I don't even know if we got paid for July yet in the state of Texas. I mean, it's that far behind, and it doesn't cover everything. In other words, it doesn't cover 100 cents on the dollar of the cost to treat. So we make up our money on Medicare and then private pay, and you just hope for the best if you have too large of a Medicaid population. As a result, when you start hiring CNAs, it is very difficult to be able to pay $25, $30 an hour, which is what we would like to do. It ends up being that more often than not, especially in rural areas where, again, rural area, what do you have? Medicaid. So when you have Medicaid as your primary payer in a facility and you're in a rural area, you end up with people who they just don't want to show up. Mm-hmm. It's a tough job. Okay. CNA is the front lines grunt worker in these facilities, and they get slapped, they get kicked, they literally have to clean up human effluence. It's not a pretty gig. And you can do that for $17 an hour. I don't know what the industry average is. I think the industry average is lower than that. Industry average is probably like $15 an hour. So now let's pretend you're in Virginia. So you can take this job with a skilled nursing facility where you're going to get literally punched by the end of the year by a patient with dementia, or you can work for the government where they'll pay you probably the same amount of money, but with government benefits. So it ends up being a situation where keeping these places staffed is extraordinarily hard because the money isn't there and the competition is extreme. So we're working on that, both within our own facilities, but industry-wide, we're also working on that. But it's always going to remain a problem. The reason that I think that the plaintiffs' bar may have overplayed its hand a little bit is that the labor crisis has finally bled into other industries. So now, it's going to be really hard to walk into court and say profits over patients because you're understaffed. Meanwhile, the local McDonald's can't get staffed up, and neither can your local restaurant or the local Walmart. So, don't tell me it's profits over patients when literally this is the first time, at least in my waking life, employees seem to be in charge and they don't necessarily want to work in all these places. So the profits over patients argument may be diminishing a little, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're no longer going to be right in the square of the bullseye. I still think that there's enough incidents overall to keep the plaintiffs' bar fat and happy for some period of time.
Yeah. And that is a good point to compare it to, the other industries that are having there's staffing shortages everywhere. And that's a whole other discussion to dive into why that is actually happening. But it's true though. And it's hard. It's probably very difficult to draw people in for that job, for that CNA job, the one that you need so badly, because it's not a glamorous job and it's a hard job. It's not you're exhausted at the end of the day and you've had to deal with so much crap in literally during that day.
Yeah. But honestly, I feel like the defense bar, there's a gold mine that the defense attorneys are sitting on top of that nobody seems to be interested in. But when you look at someone like me, my fundamental flaw is I lack the data to be able to tell you with a good degree of objectivity what a claim is worth. I can tell you basically what I think it's worth because, we all take special damages, multiply it by your favorite multiplier, depending on the state. And then if you settle for less than that, you pat yourself on the back and call yourself a winner. But, when you saw Hippo in its most recent, it's an insurtech company, in its most recent filing, they talked about one of their strategic disadvantages by comparison to their competition in admitted carrier land, lack of data, because they're new. So when I'm looking around at the sources of data out there, whether it be LexisNexis or Pacer or whatever, Nobody has better data on losses than defense firms because you have a moat. You've got privileged data that you can access and leverage. And then you've got the settlements, you've got the verdicts, and then you can run natural language processing on all the communications between you and opposing counsel and what the claims adjusters notice that you got, plus all the motions filed in every single case by line of business, such that then you can start to reverse engineer the expected cost of every single case from the very beginning, 3 weeks as opposed to 3 months or even 3 years. And as a result, you can then become the guiding light for the actuaries over at the defense firm or the insurance carrier. So the defense firm can become more like a consultant by leveraging its data, its irreplaceable data that the insurance carriers lack. And I've not seen a tremendous amount of interest in this from literally any attorneys, but it's not hard to see where it goes. So let's pretend for the sake of argument that a couple of attorneys say, great, okay, then what? So I've got this, I can forecast claims a little bit better. What's that worth to the carrier? Well, the game is up. So we stop over reserving to the tits so that we can sit there and say we're really, really good. No, we start proper reserving. I mean, I did it all the time myself back when I was doing litigation. You say it's worth 300 grand, you really know it's 50, you settle it for 65, and everyone says you did a great day. But what the economic consequence of that is that you've now encumbered additional surplus as a reserve. And your reserves have to be invested very conservatively. Your surplus can be invested very aggressively. So it's an economic tragedy to encumber surplus as a reserve unless you need to. So the less reserves you have, the better off you are. So if the defense firm has perfect data or better data than the carrier saying that this is going to be worth X every single time, that little bit of money ball right there on the aggregate is going to be worth billions of dollars to a large enough carrier.
Yeah.
So the reason that defense firms don't do this is because you're making enough money on the hourly rate that you haven't had to do it. But that's an opportunity to sit there and change where you are in the value stack, which is just, a part of the claims process, to being much more at the front of the line when you're talking to the actuaries about, let's take the reserves down on these claims and be a little bit more tight with our predictive modeling. Leveraging that into a larger idea allows defense firms to maybe expand one step further, where I see the legal industry having a supreme advantage over the incumbent players.
I think that the challenge is, I think a lot of attorneys in litigation aren't necessarily as data point driven as insurance is. And not that they shouldn't be, but I just think as just a general idea, I just think they're not as data point driven. We probably all should be, but I think that's probably where the catch up is, that you're a data guy. You clearly have that in you, but I think, and I'm generalizing. I mean, I'm a math person, but I am not the norm amongst my peers. I will say that. So I've had this, I've had this discussion with a lot of other friends of mine when we talk about setting values for cases and when we set recommended ranges, and people get really scared to put ranges and numbers on things because they don't want to be wrong. And I think that's the problem. A lot of attorneys in this litigation world have a fear of being wrong and how it will kick them in the face later.
Yeah, I get it. You never want to come in too low and then it pop up. I mean, the reality is that you need to have carriers that act more like business partners.
Yeah.
So the two big things are, did a new fact pop up we couldn't have predicted in the first place? If so, forgive it. And did you go to trial and lose? If so, forgive it. Neither of those things, at least in my firm, getting a reserve wrong because of an insufficiency of facts, so long as there was no way for us to know in the beginning, whatever, man. I mean, it is what it is. Economic tragedies happen every day. And then if you lose, if we roll the dice and lose, that's on me. That is not on you. And I think those two things ought to be preached from the carriers toward the defense bar at every opportunity. And that's why I think my panel is so good, because I make sure that they know that. I have their back if they lose. Where I get frustrated with defense attorneys is when, they just do the paint by the numbers litigation.
Well,
And
sure.
honestly, if I am finally in a position where I can pay whatever the hell I want for defense counsel, and I am paying market healthy rate. And I'm not saying I'm overpaying, but I'm not busting people's balls on 20 or $30 because I don't think that reducing your rate by 10, $15 at each timekeeper's level is going to, restore profitability if we, screw up our loss picks. What I expect in return for the respect of paying you what you're worth is, I want to see, okay, so in this situation, we can point the finger at this empty chair over here. We don't necessarily need to bring them in because we got this goofy law over here for third-party responsibilities. So that gives us an additional strategy. Oh, by the way, we actually have caps in this state on non-economic damages of $350,000. So you have $1 million limits, but you really don't have $1 million at stake. Where the hell is that analysis? That's what I expect.
Yeah.
I want to see you thinking real hard about these things, because if all you're doing is filing an answer and saying, I didn't do it, went to depots, I get the hell out of here. That's softball bullshit. So when you demonstrate a robust knowledge of how to manage the case from tip to tail, you're worth every penny.
Well, and I feel like I talk about this ad nauseum on this podcast. So everyone listening is like, okay, Megan, we hear you again. But in reality, in the first 60 days, you should be able to know how that case is going to end up. Are you going to be able, is it a case you're going to settle, and for how much? Are you transferring risk over to some other entity, or is it a summary judgment case? It doesn't have to be like, okay, we got filed the answer, now we have to take this step, now we have to retain this expert. You don't have to check all the boxes just because there's boxes there that can be checked. That you have to think about the actual case and how to exit that case. And I think that separates so many attorneys. There's so many who are just gonna just kick the can down the road and check the boxes, and others who are like aren't afraid to close a file, because I think there's a lot of attorneys who are afraid to close a file because, well, if I close a file, then what am I going to do? What am I going to bill on? Like, how about you close that file and maybe you'll get another one because you close it so quickly because they're so happy that you were able to close it.
That's part of it. I also think that, if I'm from the defense position here, I think it's extraordinarily difficult to remain in the headspace of the carrier. So with a carrier like me, I mean, my God, my panel's like 5 law firms. It should probably be 3, but I found this other guy. I was like, God, he seems smart. I want to try him out. So I've got 5 law firms I'm working with. I know him by heart. So I said this last time, but I remain resolute that the marketing efforts for law firms need to start looking at where are your referrals coming from. And I don't want to have the same episode twice about social media, but I mean, let's face it, the claims adjusters, the ones who actually give you the cases, they're younger. Not all of them are going to be 55 or even 50. They're going to be 25, 29, 34. They're going to be on TikTok. Are you on TikTok? I mean, like,
yes.
If not, why? I mean, like, there's like I'm not, I have a TikTok account, but I'm not on it because my revenue stream is not dependent upon younger people giving me things. Okay. Now I may get on it because it's the world's fastest growing social media platform. I'm on Twitter. Twitter just works better for where I'm at. But if I need claims from people who are going to be jumping firms relatively frequently, having that personal relationship through Instagram, through Twitter, through TikTok, finding them, following them around, and being authentic, like shit posting memes with them. I mean, like, you have to be somewhat irreverent, or let me reframe that. Your tone and tenor needs to match where you're at. So on LinkedIn, we all act like we're professional. And then on Twitter, it's a little more loose. On Instagram, it's much looser than that. And I know for certain attorneys, that's going to be just antithetical. But if you're an associate trying to get somewhere and you're not thinking this direction, shame on you, because all the old strategies are out the door. I have not met any of the attorneys on my panel, not once. And I probably won't meet some of them ever. And I'm fine with that. We do Zoom. We talk on the phone as frequently as I want to pay for, and we coordinate like that. So and by the way, we're growing. So when I start to delegate down these claims to someone else, I'm not bringing in people to do bad faith luncheons with me. Like even if I have 100 employees, it's just not going to happen. So how do you get my claims? You got to get to know us where we're at, and we're all going to be somewhere in the digital universe.
Yeah, I mean, I approach marketing similarly to how you're talking about. Like, for me, I think COVID was a happy introduction. I embraced it because it changed how you market. Because gone were the days you have to fly out across the country to have a lunch with somebody in hopes that you might get a call later. Like, done. Like, that is not worth any of my time. And I feel like I feel like you can make much more meaningful and significant connections eliminating that. But some people that's their tea, and that some people that's how they do it, and that's fine. That's not my tea.
Yeah, well, I mean, different strokes, different folks. It sounds like we're generally on the same page, but the getting the attention of the claims adjusters is hard enough. But then when you remember that they've got at least another 50 attorneys on hand who are probably just as good as your firm, then you have to figure out that way of differentiating yourself. And don't even try to compete on price in insurance defense. Everyone's already kind of been pushed down as far as they're going to go.
Yeah.
So how do you do it from there? And look, let's face it, even if I had a very frustrating situation somewhere where I had two different law firms win trials, two different states, two different law firms, lines of business, just a coincidence. I had a tough time getting those law firms to get more referrals because of the institutional push to use the same old, same old. So you've just got people who just know, like, if I use the biggest law firm in the country, nobody's going to second guess me about it. And things typically tend to go okay. So why would I upset the apple cart and use these upstarts over here?
Yeah.
I mean, good old fashioned politics gets in your way.
Yeah. So it must be like, you must be very happy to embrace like a new setting that you can, I mean, you get to choose how you want to, who you use 100%, and you're not swayed by upper politics or anything. So it must be, a happy change for you to be able to be like, hey, I love these 3 or 5 counsel, and that's who I want to use. And you don't have to answer to anyone but yourself.
It's helpful. It's a little more pressure. I hope I'm right.
But I mean, if you're wrong, what's the worst that can happen? You have a conversation, you might have to sever a relationship, which sucks, but I mean, it's business, and that happens.
I again, I'll never fire a law firm for losing.
Right.
I will fire a law firm for substandard performance, not enough insight, getting outflanked to procedural things, or generally speaking, telling me that we just can't bring the heat on things. Like, I need you to be thinking of the innovative stuff to do. I mean, I think of innovative stuff in insurance all day long as if it's my job. And if you're not as passionate about defense as I am about on the carrier side, then I don't want to be your friend. Like, I mean that seriously too. That's not even a joke. Like, I literally, like, I'm privileged enough now to be around people who like love to do what they do. Typically the best in their profession do love what they're doing. So why would I hang around an average attorney who's, struggling to just open his eyes about, civil procedure? I want to be with the person who's like got that trick, like, not everyone plays this game over here in St. Louis County, and we can actually remove it over there, but here's like the pluses and the minuses, and let's think about this. I got an email the other day from an attorney right off the bat. He has like 8 different things we just need to think about. I'm sitting there thinking, like, great. That's I mean, like, I know he charged me 0.3 or 5.5 for that. Fine, whatever. It gives me something to think about. It brings me a little bit further into the case. No, by the way, if it screws up, now I've got a little bit more self like ownership in this thing. Now the carrier actually is like thinking about it. That's the kind of attorney I like, because now I know for sure it's not just the paint by the numbers litigation. And look, to thine own self be true. When I was in GL, I wasn't exactly inventing new ways of litigating claims. I mean, GL kind of goes in its fashion. So if you're in that space, if you're litigating a lot of GO claims, then what unique things do you bring? I mean, you can't just be aggressive in trial. I mean, everybody is. So what are you doing beforehand that's different from your competition?
Yeah. Wouldn't it be great if someone were to come to you and be like, I'm kind of meek at trial. I just kind of let it happen. Actually, in a way, that might be something you pay more attention to. Like, at least they're honest.
Yeah. It's a hell of a marketing strategy. It's like the bank saying we don't have that much money. Buyer beware.
Well, Matthew, I know you have a hard stop, and I don't want to run over on you, but I truly appreciate you spending the time with me again today and giving us, a little one-on-one on captives. And, and I just love talking to you because you're so passionate about insurance and data that, I love hearing your very candid input on, what the defense bar could be doing differently and then what you look for. Because I think our listeners, people, claims adjusters and attorneys really value what you have to say on the issues.
I'm seriously considering putting together like a seminar on like how to sell to insurance carriers, just so that poor associates can have some. Honestly, like I do have to go, but like that probably was my number one complaint back when I was in defense. Well, not even plaintiffs, just like nobody sat down and said, "Here's how you sell." That was always such a third tier consideration. They weren't trying to develop that skill set. And as a consequence, I legitimately, I know for a fact, there's partners who just get promoted because they've been there for long enough, and they have no idea what to do. Like, what a stupid model. All right,
it is true. Thank you so much for your time.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.